The wind that day had the bite of unfinished storms, dry, sharp, whispering over Hollow Mesa like ghosts that hadn't found rest. Lydia Wren pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of her cabin, her eyes tracing the horizon where the land cracked into red cliffs and bruised sky. She'd lived out here 3 years now, alone, since her husband died in a gun trade gone wrong, but the loneliness had started to echo louder than the coyotes. That's when she saw him, a figure on horseback, dark against the sinking sun. He wasn't dressed like any ranch hand or drifter she'd seen before, his body painted with faint streaks of ash and red clay, hair long and black tied in leather at the nape. An Apache. Her heart skipped. She'd heard stories of raids, cruel, bloody stories whispered by townsfolk, but this man wasn't charging or shouting. He was wounded. His horse limped, and when he dismounted, he nearly fell. Lydia took a hesitant step forward. The sound of boots on dry dirt carried heavy between them. "Sir," she called softly, "you're hurt." The man looked up slowly. His face was striking, carved like something out of the stone mesas behind him. His eyes, dark, watchful, didn't hold fear, just exhaustion. "I will not harm you," he said, voice rough, accented, but steady. "I need water." Something in his tone, not pleading, not commanding, just honest, made Lydia's breath catch. She nodded and motioned him toward the well. He staggered forward, and when he reached for the bucket, she saw blood soaking through the side of his buckskin shirt. "You're bleeding," she said. "Here, sit." But when she reached out to steady him, he jerked back sharply. "Don't touch me," he said, low and firm. Her hand froze mid-her. She blinked at him, stung though she didn't know why. "I was only trying to help." The Apache's jaw tightened. "Your people do not touch mine." That sentence landed like a slap she didn't deserve. "I'm not my people," she said quietly. "And you're half dead." He looked away, his breath ragged. "Then let me die clean." Something inside Lydia, the part of her that had spent too many nights staring at a cold fireplace, wondering what her life was worth, refused that. She grabbed a rag, soaked it in well water, and stepped closer despite his warning. "I'll not let a man die on my land without trying." He didn't stop her this time. She pressed the wet cloth to his wound, feeling his body flinch under her hand. Heat radiated off him, fever, pain, or pride, she couldn't tell. When he finally met her eyes, there was something fierce there, not anger, but disbelief. "You're brave," he said quietly. "Or foolish." "I'll take foolish," she murmured. For the next hour, she cleaned his wound as the sun dipped and the shadows stretched. He told her nothing, not his name, not where he came from, only that his horse had been shot near the canyon by men from the railroad camp. Lydia didn't ask more. She'd learned that silence was its own kind of truth. When she led him to the small barn to rest, he paused at the threshold. "I cannot stay," he said. "If my brothers find me here—" "I don't see any brothers around," Lydia interrupted softly. "And you're bleeding through your ribs. You'll stay tonight." Their eyes met, hers steady, his wary. Finally, he nodded once. She brought him a blanket, some bread, and the last of her whiskey. When she handed it to him, her fingers brushed his for the briefest moment, accidental, fleeting. But he recoiled again, as if burned. "Don't touch me," he whispered. This time, it hurt. More than it should have. Lydia pulled her hand back slowly. "You don't have to fear me," she said, her voice tight. "Whatever you've been told about women like me, it's not all true." The Apache didn't answer. He lay back, staring at the beams above him, his breathing slowing. Lydia stood there a long time, the wind sighing through the slats. Something inside her broke, not out of rejection, but confusion. Because for the first time since her husband's death, she wanted someone to need her. And the man she was trying to save couldn't even bear her touch. Outside, the coyotes cried. And somewhere in that wild, ancient sound, Lydia Wren felt the beginning of something she couldn't name, sorrow or fate, or maybe both. The dawn came quietly over Hollow Mesa, brushing pale gold over the ridge lines. Lydia Wren stood at her cabin window, arms folded, watching the light creep across the desert floor. She hadn't slept much. Every creak of the barn, every sigh of the wind had reminded her of the man resting inside, the Apache who wouldn't let her touch him. When she finally stepped out, she found him awake, sitting near the barn door with his back straight, as if pain had no right to bend him. The wound she'd cleaned still oozed faintly, dark through the cloth. His horse stood tethered nearby, head low, breathing slow. "You should be lying down," Lydia said. He didn't look at her. "You should not have helped me." She frowned. "And yet you're still alive to argue." A faint flicker, almost a smile, ghosted across his mouth, then vanished. Lydia set a plate of bread and coffee down on the wooden crate beside him. "Eat," she said. "I'm not your enemy." He stared at the food as if deciding whether to trust it. Finally, he took the bread, tore off a piece, and ate slowly. His movements were careful, deliberate, the way a man behaves when the world has given him reason not to trust anything. "Do you have a name?" she asked. For a moment, silence. The wind moved through the barn's open door, carrying dust and a faint smell of rain. Then he said, "Nakai Stormwolf." The name hung in the air like thunder about to roll. "That's quite a name," Lydia said softly. "It suits you." He didn't respond, but she saw something shift in his eyes, a guarded pride. She took a seat on a bale of hay across from him. "You said men from the railroad shot you." "Why?" Nakai's gaze hardened. "They came to the sacred canyon. They dig with iron machines, cut into the cliffs where our dead sleep. My people told them to leave. They laughed. So we burned their wagons." Lydia swallowed. "And they came after you?" "I was the one who lit the fire." He said it without shame, as if it was just fact, like saying the sun rises in the east. Lydia's pulse quickened. She'd heard the townsfolk talk of Apache attacks, of vengeance raids. Yet looking at him, wounded, quiet, carrying a kind of sadness she didn't understand, she couldn't picture him as a killer. "You believe they deserved it?" she asked carefully. His eyes lifted to hers, dark and steady. "You bury your dead. We protect ours. Is that so different?" Lydia had no answer. He shifted, grimacing as the movement pulled at his side. "When they saw me fall, I thought I was finished. But my horse carried me away. The spirits brought me here." Lydia folded her hands, her voice low. "Then maybe the spirits want you to heal." Nakai's gaze softened, barely. "Or to remind me of the line I should not cross." She tilted her head. "What line?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Between my world and yours." The word stung, though she didn't know why. "I don't see why helping a man should be crossing any line." He looked at her then, truly looked, as if searching for the meaning behind her stubbornness. "You have not lived with walls between hearts," he said. "Your people built them. My people bled for them." She rose to her feet, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't care about walls or who built them. I care about what's right in front of me. And right now, that's a man who's too proud to let someone care." Nakai's jaw tightened. "You should not care." "Too late," she said, turning toward the door. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Nakai said, "Lydia Wren." She stopped. It was the first time he'd said her name. He said it slowly, like tasting something forbidden. "If I leave tonight, you will forget I came." Lydia turned, meeting his gaze across the barn. "You think I could forget the first man I met who'd rather die than be touched?" The silence between them burned hotter than any fire. His hand twitched, not quite a reach, not quite a withdrawal. Then he said softly, "Your kindness will bring you pain." Her heart thudded. Maybe it already has. When she walked away, his eyes followed her, unreadable, dark as the thunderclouds gathering over Hollow Mesa. For the first time in years, Lydia felt alive. And for the first time in a long while, Nakai Stormwolf felt afraid, not of bullets or blood, but of a woman who made him question the walls he'd sworn never to let fall. By the time the sun sank behind Hollow Mesa, the sky had turned the color of burnt copper. Lydia Wren stood at her cabin door, watching dark clouds gather over the horizon. The desert rarely got rain, but when it came angry. The kind of storm that tore fences and swallowed the roads whole. Inside the barn, Nakai Stormwolf was already saddling his horse. "You shouldn't be up," Lydia said, stepping in. "That wound will open again." "I have stayed too long," Nakai replied without looking at her. His voice was steady, but his movements betrayed pain. "Your kindness has weight. I cannot carry it." "You make it sound like I gave you a curse," Lydia said softly. He didn't answer. He tightened the strap on his saddle, his muscles flexing under the low light, his skin glowing with the heat of fever and effort. His breath came short, but his pride refused to show weakness. "I told you," Lydia said, folding her arms. "You're not ready." "I have ridden through worse," he said. "Not with a bullet wound through your ribs." Finally, he looked up. Their eyes locked, hers stubborn and pleading, his dark and distant. Lightning flashed outside, lighting his face in silver and shadow. "You do not understand," he said low. "If they find me here, they will not only kill me, they will kill you too." Lydia's voice faltered. "Who?" "My people." "Or yours." "It matters little now." Rain began to fall, slow at first, then heavy, beating against the roof like fists. The storm had arrived. He took a step toward the open barn door, but Lydia moved in front of him, blocking his path. "You're not going anywhere tonight," she said firmly. "Move." "No." Nakai's hand twitched at his side. Not in anger, but restraint. He could have shoved past her easily. He was stronger, taller, and built like the desert itself, but he didn't. Instead, he lowered his gaze, as if afraid that one more look at her would break something inside him. "You don't know what I've done," he said quietly. "Then tell me." He didn't. The wind screamed through the cracks in the boards, and thunder rolled deep enough to shake the floor. Lydia placed a hand on the doorframe beside him, refusing to move. "You saved your people," she said. "That doesn't make you wicked." He turned sharply toward her, his expression raw. "I killed men." "So did this land," she said, her tone steady. "Every man who came west brought death with him. Don't pretend yours is the only sin worth bleeding over." For the first time, Nakai faltered. The rain poured harder, and water began seeping through the dirt floor. Lydia grabbed his arm to pull him back inside. Her fingers brushed his bare skin, warm, damp, alive, and he flinched as if struck. "Don't," he whispered, pulling back. "Please." That word "please" wasn't the command of a proud warrior. It was a plea, soft and haunted. Lydia's breath caught. "What are you so afraid of?" she asked. His voice broke slightly when he answered, "Of forgetting who I am." They stood there, two souls separated by a storm and something deeper. Outside, lightning ripped across the sky like the slash of a blade. Inside, Nakai's chest rose and fell rapidly, his control thinning. "I'm not asking you to forget," she said gently. "Only to heal." He closed his eyes. "You think it is that simple?" "No," she whispered, "but it's a start." Another flash of lightning, and suddenly the barn door blew open. Wind howled in, knocking loose a hanging lantern. It crashed to the ground, flames licking across the hay. "Move!" Nakai shouted. He lunged forward, his arm instinctively wrapping around Lydia to pull her away from the fire. For one breathless second, she was in his arms, close enough to feel the strength beneath his scars, close enough to hear his heartbeat thundering against her chest. But as soon as the danger passed, he released her as though she burned him. He stepped back, chest heaving, eyes full of turmoil. "You see?" he rasped. "Every time you reach for me, something burns." Lydia's eyes glistened. "Maybe it's not the fire that's the problem. Maybe it's what you're trying to keep frozen." He said nothing, only looked at her, really looked, as if trying to remember a time before pain ruled him. The rain finally began to drown the flames, hissing them into steam. The smell of smoke filled the air, heavy and sweet. Nakai turned toward the barn door again, the storm reflecting in his eyes. "When the rain stops," he said, "I will go." "And if it never does?" she asked softly. He hesitated, just long enough for her to see the faintest crack in his armor. "Then maybe," he said, voice barely a whisper, "the spirits are not done with me yet." Outside, the thunder rolled again, but inside Hollow Mesa, something else had begun to stir. Not the storm of the sky, but the one between them. The morning after the storm came soft and gray, like the desert itself was holding its breath. The world outside Hollow Mesa felt washed clean. Puddles glimmered in wagon ruts, and steam curled off the rocks as the first light of day touched the soaked earth. Lydia Wren opened her cabin door and saw him still there. Nakai Stormwolf sat by the corral, his hair still damp, dark against his shoulders. His horse grazed nearby, the animal's hide steaming in the morning air. Lydia half expected to find the barn empty, the warrior gone without a word. Instead, he was sharpening a knife, his movements calm, almost meditative. "You stayed," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "The road is mud." The spirit said, "Wait." Lydia folded her arms. "I thought you didn't listen to spirits when they told you to stay." He paused, the blade gleaming in the sunlight. "Maybe they grew louder." Something in his voice made her chest tighten, that same quiet ache she'd felt last night when he'd pulled her out of the fire. She still remembered the feel of his body against hers, the power, the warmth, the danger, and the way he'd released her as though he'd touched death itself. She walked closer, careful not to startle him. "You saved me," she said softly. He didn't answer, but his jaw flexed slightly. "I'm not one to forget that," she added. "I did what anyone would," he murmured. "Not anyone," Lydia said, shaking her head. "You could have let me burn." That made him look up. For a long moment, their eyes held, the morning wind stirring her hair, his face unreadable. Then he said, "You have courage. But courage gets people killed." Lydia smiled faintly. "So does pride." The faintest curve touched his mouth, not quite a smile, more like an admission he didn't want to make. She brought him a bowl of beans and cornbread, still warm from her stove. He hesitated before taking it. She could see his hands tremble slightly as he reached out, as though even that small acceptance of kindness cost him something. "Do you always treat strangers this way?" he asked. "Only the ones who bleed on my floor," she replied with a half-smile. He looked down at his food. "You speak like someone who lost too much." Lydia's breath caught. "I did." He didn't ask how, and she didn't tell him. But her eyes drifted to the ridge behind the house, the one marked by a single wooden cross. After a long silence, Nakai said quietly, "When I was a boy, my father told me something. Do not touch what the spirits haven't given you. Even kindness can turn to fire in your hands." Lydia studied him. "And you believe that?" He nodded slowly. "It has always been true." "Maybe the spirits never meant it to be a curse," she said gently. "Maybe they meant to see if you'd be brave enough to break it." His dark eyes flickered up to hers, wary but curious. You think I am cursed? I think, she said, stepping closer, you're afraid of something that isn't even chasing you anymore. The air between them thickened. Nakai stood, his full height shadowing her in the doorway. You don't understand what happens when our worlds mix, he said softly. It ends in blood. Maybe this time it doesn't, she whispered. For a moment, it felt as if time itself stopped, just her breath, his heartbeat, the soft rustle of wind in the mesquite trees. Then Nakai took a deliberate step back. I will leave when the road clears, he said. You will forget me. Lydia swallowed the ache in her throat. You keep saying that like you want it to be true. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because if it isn't, he said quietly, neither of us will have peace. Later, as he repaired his saddle, Lydia caught him glancing toward the hills, his gaze always searching, as if expecting someone to come for him. She could feel it in the air. Danger wasn't far. At dusk, the sound of distant hooves echoed off the mesa. Nakai froze, his knife halfway through the air. Riders, he said. Too many. Lydia's pulse spiked. Railroad men? He shook his head slowly. No, Apache. Her mouth went dry. Your people? He looked toward the ridge, his eyes cold and full of something she hadn't seen before. Dread. Not mine. The war band. They hunt me. Lydia's heart pounded. Why? He turned to her, his voice low and raw. Because I defied them. I spared the lives I was ordered to take. And now they come to finish what I refused to do. The setting sun cast a red glow across his face, like blood painted in light. Lydia took a step toward him, her voice trembling. Then we'll face them together. He looked at her, disbelief flickering behind his eyes. You would die for me? No, she whispered. But I'd fight beside you. For the first time, Nakai Stormwolf didn't pull away. Outside, thunder growled again, not from the sky this time, but from the pounding of hooves approaching Hollow Mesa. The dawn broke over the red cliffs, casting long streaks of gold across the valley where Lydia Wren stood, clutching her shawl against the chill. The air smelled of rain and sagebrush, and somewhere down below, she could hear the soft rhythm of a drum, a heartbeat echoing through the land. It had been 3 days since the raid that left the town in smoke and the Apache camp silent. Lydia had nursed Nakai through fever and wounds, and though his body was strong, his spirit seemed to wander in shadows. He hadn't spoken much since. The night he returned from the canyon, his eyes distant, filled with ghosts only he could see. Lydia walked down toward the corral where he was working. His bare back glistened in the morning light, muscles flexing as he lifted a heavy beam into place. The sound of wood against wood echoed sharply. Around his neck hung a string of turquoise. Stones, worn, sacred, and glowing faintly against his skin. She hesitated before speaking. You should be resting, she said softly. Without turning, Nakai replied, The storm took the fences. The horses will wander if I do not fix them. His voice was low, calm, but heavy with something unsaid. Lydia stepped closer, her boots crunching softly in the sand. You're hurt, she whispered. Let the men from town handle it. At that, Nakai turned, his dark eyes meeting hers. Men from your town do not build fences for Apache blood, he said, and his words cut deeper than he intended. He saw the pain flicker across her face, and regret followed instantly. I didn't mean, he began, but Lydia shook her head. No, you're right, she said, her tone fragile. They wouldn't. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and looked toward the rising sun. They don't understand you, and maybe they never will. He studied her then, the way her eyes carried both sorrow and fire. The way her hands trembled not from fear, but from something stronger, something she was trying to hide. And you? He asked quietly. Do you understand me, Lydia Wren? She swallowed hard. I'm trying." For a long moment, silence fell between them. The only sounds were the wind sighing through the mesquite and the distant cry of a hawk. Lydia turned to leave, but Nakai reached out, his hand gently catching her wrist. His touch was warm, grounding, and full of unspoken things. "When I was a boy," he said slowly, "my father told me the earth remembers every step a man takes. That it judges him not by his words, but by his footprints. I wonder what the earth says about mine." Lydia looked down at his hand on hers. "Maybe," she said, her voice trembling, "the earth knows you're trying to walk a better path." He smiled faintly, the first real smile she'd seen in days. "And what about you, Lydia Wren? What path do you walk?" Her eyes glistened. "The one that keeps leading back to you." Nakai froze, the words sinking deep into him like rain into dry soil. He let go of her wrist slowly, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't trust himself to hold on. "You should not say things like that," he murmured. "Why?" she asked, stepping closer. "Because I'm white? Because the world says we're not supposed to care for each other?" He looked away. "Because it makes leaving harder." The truth of it broke her heart. She had known from the start that their worlds could never fully touch, his bound to the wind and wild lands, hers tied to a town that whispered and judged. But in this moment, none of that mattered. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and placed her hand on his chest. "Then don't leave," she whispered. "Not yet." Nakasi's heartbeat thundered beneath her palm. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe her in, the faint scent of lavender and dust, the warmth of her nearness. "The spirits will not forgive me if I stay," he said, voice low. "And what about your heart?" she asked. "Will it forgive you if you go?" His jaw tightened. There were no easy answers. The wind rose, carrying the sound of distant thunder again, and the sky began to darken. He stepped back, eyes full of pain and longing. "There are battles that even warriors cannot win," he said softly. Lydia's eyes brimmed with tears. "Then maybe this time," she whispered, "you shouldn't fight." The rain began to fall, slow, heavy drops that splashed against the earth like tears. And in that fragile space between storm and silence, Nakai Stormwolf turned away, torn between the duty of his people and the call of a woman who had become his home. The sun was sinking low behind the western ridge, painting the land in shades of fire and copper. Lydia Wren stood near the corral, her hands trembling as she clutched the folded blanket she'd been mending all afternoon. The prairie wind whistled through the posts, carrying dust and whispers like voices of the past that refused to quiet. She saw him then, Nakai Stormwolf walking from the canyon trail, his steps slow but sure. His long black hair caught the dying light, and his body glowed with that bronze strength that both frightened and fascinated her. The turquoise beads around his neck glimmered with the colors of the setting sun. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he went to his horse, brushing the dust from its coat. The silence between them had grown like a canyon widening, each day since he'd refused to touch her hand when she tried to clean his wound. She could still remember that night, the sting of rejection, the way his voice, deep and rough, had said, "Do not touch me. Your kindness will bring you trouble." But she couldn't forget the look in his eyes when he said it. It wasn't hatred, it was pain. "You're hurt again," Lydia said softly, seeing a new cut along his shoulder. "You can't keep doing this to yourself." Naka's dark gaze met hers. "What I do is what keeps me alive." "And what about what keeps you human?" she asked. He said nothing, only turned toward the horizon. The wind lifted his hair, revealing the faint red paint still streaked along his temple, a symbol. She didn't understand but respected. She stepped closer. "You could stay," she whispered. "You don't have to run anymore. Not from soldiers. Not from anyone." He gave a bitter laugh. "You do not understand, white woman. My people are ghosts now. If I stay, I become one too. Lydia's throat tightened. Then let me be your ghost, she said before she could stop herself. Nakai froze. The only sound was the wind and the restless stamping of his horse. His eyes softened for a heartbeat, then turned cold again. You don't know what you say. Yes, I do, Lydia said, her voice shaking. I see the way you look when you think I'm not watching. You want peace, Nakai, same as I do. He turned toward her then, and for the first time, she saw something unguarded in his face, a storm beneath the calm. He stepped closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. His chest rose and fell with the weight of unspoken things. You think I have peace? He murmured. You think touching you will heal what's been taken from me? It will only burn what's left. Lydia's eyes filled. Then let it burn, Nakai. Let it burn everything that's kept you from feeling alive again. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind stilled. The birds fell silent. Nakai lifted a hand slowly, hesitantly, his fingers trembling as they brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch sent fire down her spine. But then, as if struck by his own weakness, he pulled away sharply. No, he said, his voice breaking. You cannot follow me into this. Nakai, he turned from her, his body taut with conflict. If I stay, you will die for it. The men who hunt me do not forgive. They will come for you too. Lydia's tears fell freely now. Then let them come. I've been dead since my husband's grave closed. You brought me back to life, Nakai. Can't you see that? He stopped, his back still to her. For a long while, he didn't move. The sunset bled into twilight, the sky bruised with sorrow. Then, in a voice barely more than a whisper, he said, You should not have saved me, Lydia Wren. She took a step forward, her voice breaking. Maybe it was you who saved me. Nakai didn't answer. He mounted his horse, his silhouette framed by the fading light. Without another word, he rode toward the canyon. Swallowed by the gathering night, Lydia stood there long after he was gone, the blanket still clutched in her hands. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint echo of his name through the desert. She whispered into the darkness, Then I'll wait for you, even if the stars themselves fall. And as the first stars appeared, Lydia Wren felt the ache of both love and loss, two fires burning the same fragile heart. The wind that swept through Hollow Mesa carried the scent of rain and sagebrush, the kind of wind that whispered of endings. Lydia Wren stood on her porch, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. It had been weeks since Nakai Stormwolf had vanished into the canyon, leaving her with silence and a wound that refused to heal. Every night since his leaving, she lit the lantern outside her cabin, the one he'd once repaired after a storm broke its glass. And each night she whispered his name into the wind, hoping it would find him wherever he rode. But the mesa had remained empty until now. A distant figure appeared at the horizon, moving through the orange dust of dusk. Her heart stuttered. She knew that shape, that stride, the way his shoulders carried the sky. Nakai. She breathed. Her hands trembled as he drew nearer, leading his horse, the animal limping slightly. Nakai's long black hair was tangled with dust, his chest bare beneath a tattered blanket. His turquoise beads caught the fading sunlight, glinting like fragments of memory. When he reached the porch, he didn't speak. His eyes, dark hollowed by pain, found hers and held them. I told you I'd wait, Lydia said, her voice soft but steady. He looked down, as if ashamed of the truth written in her eyes. I rode far, he said. Too far to remember peace. The soldiers have burned another camp. My brothers are gone, my tribe scattered. Her heart ached for him. Then you have no place to return to. He lifted his gaze. I have this place. Lydia's breath caught. The words were so simple, but they fell like thunder in the still air. For the first time, he stepped closer. His hand brushed her cheek, gently, reverently, as though he feared she might vanish. She closed her eyes at the touch she had longed for all these nights. "Why now, Nakai?" she whispered. "Why come back if you mean to leave again?" "Because I dreamed of you," he said quietly. "You standing here, calling my name. And when I woke, I could not tell the dream from the truth." Tears blurred her vision. "Then stay and make it true." He hesitated, torn between two worlds, one dying, one forbidden. The firelight from her cabin flickered across his face, revealing the war between pride and longing. "I've brought death with me, Lydia, if they find me here." She shook her head. "I'm not afraid anymore." There was a long silence, broken only by the creak of the wooden boards and the distant roll of thunder. Then, slowly, Nakai stepped inside her cabin. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like fate being sealed. Inside, the room glowed with lamplight. The scent of cedar and rain filled the air. Lydia turned toward him, her hands trembling as she reached for the edge of the blanket across his shoulder. He let her touch him this time. Her fingers traced the scars, the story of a man who had survived too much and loved too little. "You're burning," she said, feeling the fever in his skin. "Then let it burn," Nakai whispered, his breath catching. "You said once that fire could make us alive again." When their lips met, it wasn't wild or desperate. It was slow, aching, like two souls relearning what it meant to feel. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft and steady, tapping against the roof. It was the first rain Hollow Mesa had seen in months, and it carried a strange promise of renewal, of endings turned into beginnings. Later, as the night deepened, Nakai sat by the window while Lydia slept beside him, her head resting on his arm. His gaze wandered out to the canyon beyond the mesa. Somewhere out there, his people still wandered, ghosts in the land that had forgotten them. He touched the turquoise pendant at his chest and whispered a few words in Apache, a prayer for the dead. Then he looked back at Lydia, sleeping peacefully for the first time since he had left. For the first time, Nakai Stormwolf allowed himself to believe that perhaps love could be stronger than exile. The storm outside faded to a hush. Dawn crept slowly over the land, painting the mesa in gold. Lydia stirred, her hand finding his, and he didn't pull away. Whatever the day would bring, soldiers, danger, or peace, it would find them together. And for two broken souls beneath the endless western sky, that was enough.